My name's Alistair Burt, and I'm a former Minister for the Middle East. As such, and as a backbench MP for over 3 decades, I've taken a long interest in the Middle East peace process in various iterations, and lived through a number of moments of significance, some recognised as such at the time and others only later. We're approaching one such moment already recognised as such: the potential for Israel to proceed with elements of the so-called Trump plan, most notably from July the 1st, the annexation of land currently designated by international law as occupied, although Israel disputes both terms. To discuss this, I've recorded for the Conservative Middle East Council, in the last couple of weeks, a series of podcasts of around 40 minutes each, and I express my very warm thanks and appreciation to Hussam Zumlot, the head of the Palestinian mission to the UK, to Mark Regev, the outgoing ambassador of the State of Israel, Nikolai Mladinov, the UN Special Coordinator for the peace process, and Ian Black, journalist and author most notably of Enemies and Neighbours, Arabs and Jews in Palestine and Israel, 1917 to 2017. I hope you agree this could not be a more informed group at such a time. All are long-standing friends, and my approach has been to let Hussam Zumlot and Mark Regev largely make their own case, Nikolai Mladinov to explain how he is approaching this particular moment, and then discuss all three with Ian Black. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you find the talks worth your time, which is much appreciated. My guest on today's podcast is Ian Black, who is a noted journalist and author who has covered region for over 30 years and is the author in particular of a very important seminal work entitled Enemies and Neighbours, Arabs and Jews in Palestine and Israel, 1917 to 2017, which was a comprehensive history of the areas of conflict and difficulty, and a walk through the major issues relating to the Middle East peace process and attempts to settle this. So, Ian, thank you very much for joining me this morning. I wanted to start by saying, in your experience, how serious do you think this present situation is as we approach annexation? Is it a significant issue, or is this just another milestone along the way, and in 5 years' time we will wonder what we were talking about?
No, I think it is a very significant moment. I think that if it goes ahead, we can talk, I'm sure, about what happens if it doesn't go ahead, because it's not clear exactly what's going to happen. But if it does go ahead, even in a more minimal approach from the Israeli side, I think it will have significant consequences. Most importantly, I think it will mark the end of what has, for a very, very long time, been considered to be the only solution to what is arguably the world's most intractable conflict. And that is on the basis of two states for two peoples. It goes back a long way to the British Peel Commission of 1937, 20 years into the British control of Palestine, less in terms of the mandatory period, but the Peel Commission concluded in 1937 that the national aspirations of Jews and Arabs in Palestine were irreconcilable, and that the only way to resolve the conflict was, to use the language of the time, partition between Jewish and an Arab state.
This is because they are two nationalistic drives.
They're two nationalistic drives which are claiming the same territory, broadly speaking. And that's, in modern terms, that's the two-state solution. If unilateral Israeli annexation goes ahead from July the 1st, the concept of a two-state solution will be dead, or it'll be, to vary the metaphor, the last nail in the coffin of etc. etc. A unilateral move by Israel, supported by the United States under Donald Trump, will effectively render impossible the idea of an agreed two-state solution to this most intractable of conflicts. And that is its significance. Whether it will happen is another question, and we can discuss that, I'm sure. But if it does go ahead, it will be a very, very significant moment. I mean, I've spent a lot of my working life dealing with this issue. I think it will be as important, if you like, as the War of 1948 or the War of 1967, a unilateral Israeli move opposed vigorously internationally, supported, yes, by the United States, obviously opposed by the Palestinian side, and indeed much of the Arab world. So if it goes ahead, it will be a very, very important and negative moment.
I discussed this with both with Hossam Zomlot, the head of the Palestinian mission to the UK, and Mark Regev, the Israeli ambassador, and clearly differing views on what may happen next. But I think an acceptance from both that this was a very significant moment. You've listened to both interviews. Is there anything that was particularly surprising in what the ambassadors said? I did give them the opportunity to speak at length about their position. Was there anything you thought that was different or new, or anything that gave you a hint about what may happen next from what they said?
Well, they are, of course, both highly experienced diplomats. Hossam Zomlot was, of course, as you discussed in the podcast, the PLO representative, the PLO ambassador in Washington before he was thrown out effectively by President Trump. Mark Regev is also a similarly highly experienced diplomat. They're both smooth and articulate exponents of their government's view. In the case of Hossam Zomlot, the Palestinian Authority. No, I don't think I was surprised by anything they said. I noted much more what they didn't say, and I could go through each one. I mean, for example, Hossam Zomlot, if the annexation goes ahead, it will increase popular pressure on the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. That's on the basis of the Oslo Accords of 1993 and 1995, more precisely. I think it will increase pressure on the Palestinian Authority to disband itself or to allow armed, well, certainly resistance against Israel's unilateral annexationist move.
The PA has threatened before to disband itself and hand the keys back, and it doesn't quite do that because there are other vested interests that keep it in place.
Well, that's certainly true. But I think that if annexation goes ahead, and of course it does depend on the degree of annexation, and again, that's an important variable in this situation. But the PA has its own interests, but if it doesn't respond to a unilateral Israeli move to annex parts of the West Bank, then I think it will be in a very difficult position. So, for example, it's not clear to me, at least, what the suspension of security coordination with Israel means in practical terms. Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, has threatened to do that many times in the past. But it basically will, if annexation goes ahead, it will increase the pressure on the PA and make it much harder for it to act as the representative of the Palestinian people. There's no peace process. Israeli annexation will go ahead largely unchallenged. And for younger Palestinians in particular, this has long been the perception that the PA is basically complicit in maintaining the status quo. In its most extreme version, it's described as a subcontractor of the Israeli occupation. So Hossam Zumlot didn't talk about that at all. And I think that will be a problem if it goes ahead. Of course, it's a generational thing too. Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, is in his mid-80s, but there are young Palestinians who have known nothing for their entire lives apart from the grim reality of Israeli occupation, the discrimination, the lack of opportunities, and so on and so forth. And I don't think that they will continue to support it. So I think that's one thing.
On Mark Regev's side, anything you picked out that he didn't talk about?
Well, again, I mean, Mark Regev is similarly a highly articulate and smooth diplomat, but he didn't talk about, in any way, as far as I recall, the opposition within Israel to the implications of going ahead with annexation. It's important to point out that Mark Regev, before he was ambassador to the UK, spent several years as Netanyahu's personal spokesman. So there is a sense that, I mean, he's an affable guy, but he is identified with Netanyahu, and
I thought, yes, he is, and I think many people are aware of his background. I did ask him about that. My take on it was he rather lightly dismissed it. He didn't spend a great deal of time on that, and he referred to the contact sport in Israeli politics, of what Israeli politics was all about. They have many diverse opinions in a free society and the like. But you're right. I think we are aware of very significant divergences of opinion amongst the government between Foreign Minister Ashkenazi, between Benny Gantz and the Prime Minister. And also, I thought he was rather light on the concerns abroad, which are very serious. And when I challenged him on the Arab states' reaction, and he spoke of the lowest common denominator of the Arab League, in actual fact, the individual statements made, particularly by the UAE, have been very critical. They've not been related to the Arab League, and they have said, in effect, normalization cannot go ahead if annexation goes ahead. And my sense was that he either indicated that Israel's view was we'd heard it all before and nothing ever happens, or he was confident that although things were being said, they would still be able to proceed even if annexation took place, because normalization was more important in the region than annexation. Is that a judgment you think is well founded?
Well, I agree with you. I agree with your assessment entirely. I mean, it's true that when Donald Trump, with Netanyahu beaming all over his face, unveiled his deal of the century, so-called, in January of this year, the ambassadors of, if I remember rightly, the UAE, Oman, and Bahrain were in the Oval Office, and the Saudi ambassador was conspicuously absent. But I think that they were going through the motions, and the Arab world will, the Gulf states in particular, will not ignore this. It may well be the case, of course, that normalization will continue, but in less visible ways. But I don't think that the consequences of going ahead with annexation that Mark Regev was so dismissive of is an accurate statement, and certainly not in the case of Jordan and Egypt, which of course have long-lasting peace treaties with Israel. King Abdullah of Jordan, of course, has been extremely outspoken, as has the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed. But you're right. You're right. It's right to argue, I think, that the wider Arab world is fed up with the Palestinian cause. There's a sense of fatigue. There's no question about that. They want to focus on common interests with Israel, the Iranian threat in particular, Israel as a hub of technology and economic opportunity and so on and so forth. But I do think that there are limits to that, and I think that Arab states, and particularly including the Gulf states, will not go on with this normalization, as warned indeed by the Emiratis in particular, if annexation goes ahead. So I do think that there are consequences that Mark Regev was understandably and diplomatically playing down. And I also think that there are, likely repercussions elsewhere in the world.
If we look at Nikolai Mladenov's position and where the current circumstances leave him, I thought he was very down on the situation and expressed a significant degree of worry. He said that annexation would destroy the prospects of talks for a very long time. He spoke about the uncertainty that would result, and the only sign of light that he offered, interestingly, was in answer to the question about reconciliation between the PLO and Hamas, and he referred to that as a massive game changer. I'm not sure if everyone would see it that way, but that was his view. What do you make of that?
Of course, the Palestinian position has for what is it, 14 years, 13 years maybe, been debilitated, hugely affected by the split between Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the PA in Ramallah. And of course, that's been to Israel's advantage. There's no question about that. The PA remains officially committed to the Oslo Accords of 1993. Hamas doesn't. It was declared back in 2007 by Israel as a hostile entity. We've seen three wars since then. Obviously, the Hamas position is that their armed resistance against Israel is entirely legitimate. They're financially supported, interestingly, by the Qataris. And in fact, one of the most interesting things that's happened in the last few days was that the Qataris have reportedly threatened to withdraw their financial support for Gaza if Israeli annexation of parts of the West Bank goes ahead. So that would remove a significant element of stabilization, if you like, from the Gaza Strip, and indeed be an extremely volatile new element in the situation. So it is important, certainly, for the Palestinians to get their act together and to reunify in spite of their distinct positions in Ramallah and Gaza. And it may well be that that would be a game changer if it happens and if it goes ahead. But of course, there are still significant differences between the West Bank and Gaza. The PA does have an interest in maintaining the status quo. But again, if annexation goes ahead, I think it will be much, much harder for the PA to maintain the status quo. And so all bets are off.
One of the interesting things that's emerged in the last few weeks has been whether or not the United States has been fully behind this. It seemed to me that it started as being very much in favour, waned to a degree when Secretary of State Pompeo went to Israel, and now there is a suggestion that it might be more important to see the threat of annexation as something which would bring people back to the table rather than it go ahead. But this places everybody in a very awkward situation. The Israeli political position would presumably be weakened if it did not go ahead with annexation to some degree. if that doesn't happen, then what would be the reaction of the Palestinians, and whether or not there are more attempts being made now by Arab states and others, knowing what's at risk, to try and see the Palestinian position be represented at negotiations, rather than just seeing stopping annexation as an end in itself, because it isn't. So, where do you think we are absolutely with the up to date? And if you were a betting individual, what do you think will happen on July the 1st or shortly afterwards?
Well, of course, I have no idea what will happen on July the 1st or shortly afterwards. But clearly, Netanyahu has a range of options. I mean, many people who know him well describe him as sort of schizophrenic, in that he's notoriously, well, he's risk averse, generally speaking. But of course, he is very aware of his historical legacy. He's also very much aware of the corruption charges that are looming against him. So it isn't clear what's going to happen. There's a minimalist version, and then there's a maximalist version, and maybe maybe it'll be somewhere in the middle. Part of the Trump plan is approval of, or implied approval at least, if not explicitly, for Israeli annexation of the Jordan Valley. That's the strip of land on the western side of the river Jordan. But another version could be the annexation of, or the application of, Israeli law stroke sovereignty, to use the language that is being employed over there, to settlement blocks. So, for example, Ma'ale Adumim, northeast of Jerusalem, is very much treated as part of the Greater Jerusalem area. So Gush Etzion, the Etzion block south of Bethlehem, is another possibility, or Ariel, north of Nablus in the West Bank, are all possible targets for the application of Israeli sovereignty, annexation by any other name. So the range of possibilities is broad. Netanyahu may also decide to defer it, to pocket his pressure to go ahead with it, and blame it on his coalition allies, on the blue and white leader Benny Gantz, who finally, after 3 inconclusive elections, joined his government earlier this year. The range of activities is very broad.
If he delays it too long, of course, then he runs into the issue of the November United States elections.
Well, the window of opportunity is clearly closing. I mean, given the state of public opinion in the US and the Joe Biden candidacy, then it's a narrow window of opportunity. But I noticed that just yesterday, the White House was talking about a big announcement from President Trump in the coming days. So it's not gone away, clearly, and there are serious implications to this, both in the US and, of course, for Israel and the Palestinians.
A further complication has arisen with the views of some of the settler community, who don't accept the plan either, because they fundamentally do not accept in any way the concept of a Palestinian state, and they fear that annexation will not destroy the opportunity for a Palestinian state altogether, but as part of the Trump plan, it foresees it, and the settlers' aim seems to be clearly to disrupt that. Equally, now, as you know, in some areas of the West Bank, a younger generation are saying, well, if there's not going to be 2 states, we'll have 1 state with equal rights and the like. does the pressure for one state grow, and can one state ever be what would be accepted by everyone as the basis of a reasonable state, which is where everybody lives in the same place, they all have the same rights?
Well, it's fine. Just to answer your last point, the idea of one state with equal rights is a great idea, but nobody, and I stress that, has any idea of how to achieve that. Nobody has a workable strategy for realizing that vision. Of course, it's become increasingly fashionable, particularly amongst younger people, to talk about equal rights between the river and the sea. The river and the sea is obviously the Jordan and the Mediterranean. It's a lightly coded reference, or indeed not coded at all, for equal rights between what is it, the 18 million people, I think, who live in that area. But nobody has a workable strategy for doing it. And I'm not convinced that anybody could lay out a strategy for doing that. The principle of two states for the two peoples who are doomed to live in the land between the river and the sea it has, as I said earlier, has been a significant approach to this conflict for over 80 years, dating back to British mandatory times. I do not see an alternative. It's an abstract idea, and I would say that it is a fantasy. But maybe I'll be proved wrong, and I would indeed, if there's no other solution, then go for it. But I don't see that there's a workable strategy for achieving that.
Certainly, this all adds to the sense of concern that Nikolai Mladenov raised, with seeing an end to this being very difficult. And also, he raised at the end of his remarks a worry that this would provide an opportunity for further radicalization in the area. And one of the things that has not been part of the issues between Israel and the Palestinians as a significant part of it has been the religious element, which is, of course, in operation throughout much of the rest of the region. Do you share a concern that this element might come into the equation if there is not a basis for negotiations going forward, if this looks to have been the end of the line, and that there are plenty of seriously bad people in the region, as we know, way beyond those who are already in place in Palestine and Israel, and the door could be open to something much worse, which Mladenov expressed a fear of?
I'm less worried about religious extremism on either side than I am about the regional interest seeing an opportunity, if you like, regional players, particularly the Iranians. Iranians already support Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That's a small group in the Gaza Strip. Of course, they support Hezbollah in Lebanon. I'm less concerned about the religious radicalization. Of course, there are always individuals and organizations that would take advantage of the deterioration and the reframing of the narrative. But again, I also, I wanted to say something about Gaza. I didn't answer your question about the nature of the Israeli opposition, the settler opposition to the Trump plan, the Kushner plan, if you like. But it's important to point out that 2 million Palestinians in Gaza are not part of the story at all. They're not part of the plan. in any way. So the Palestinian state, very much in inverted commas, proposed by Trump, is a state only in name. It doesn't control its borders, its airspace, maritime authority whatsoever, and it'll be broken up into enclaves or Bantustans, to use an obvious parallel, by Israeli settlements and areas of control. So it's only a state in name. So the opposition of the Israeli right-wing settlers who see Judea and Samaria as their ancestral homeland is not really a factor. It is a domestic factor within Israel, certainly.
You've covered this for a very long time, and I'm interested in what you think of this. In his remarks, Nikolai Mladenov expressed sympathy for Trump's approach in trying to shake the kaleidoscope a bit, do something different. And that sense of frustration is shared by many of us who've looked at all the attempts. And although I didn't agree with the proposals put forward by President Trump, I could see and understand the frustration behind it. I was interested that the UN special coordinator thought the same thing. And this also leads back to the persistent Israeli position that is that the Palestinians have missed the opportunity again and again and again to resolve this. And Mark Regev went through that. And I think there is some similarity in what Nikolai Mladenov said about his belief that the Americans at least were trying something different, and the Israeli position, which is also one of frustration in seeking to resolve this and finding it almost impossible to do with the Palestinians. Now, you've seen this, for a long time from both sides. What do you make of that persistent Israeli claim that at the end of the day, it is the Palestinians who've walked away from the opportunity of resolving this more often than they have?
Well, how long have you got? Goodness me.
About 5 minutes.
The Israeli claim is a long-standing one, and it's famously and succinctly encapsulated in the saying of the former late Israeli Foreign Minister Abba Eban, who said something like, "The Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity." But the fact is, historically, the Palestinians were never consulted ever about the Zionist enterprise. They just weren't, and I think it's important to point that out. And in fact, it's very important to point that out. Whether it was the Ottoman period before the First World War, or the period of British rule, the Palestinians, the native population, the vast majority, maybe 87% in 1917, when Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, were never consulted about British plans to support the Zionist movement. So there is an Israeli argument which said, well, the Palestinians are unrealistic, and they have rejected golden opportunities many, many times. But the fact is that the Israeli government, certainly since 1967, has behaved consistently in contravention of international law, which brings us back, of course, to the issue of annexation, the settlement of civilians in territory occupied in wartime is illegal under international law. There's no question about that, and that's why this annexation, or looming annexation, may turn out to be an important turning point, precisely because it's supported by the most powerful country on the planet. I'm not saying that the Palestinians are perfect. They're clearly not. They constituted themselves as a movement of national liberation, and they found it hard to make the transition to dealing with Israel. But the fact remains that in 1988, Yasser Arafat, the charismatic, long-standing leader of the PLO, recognized the state of Israel. It's important to remember that. And I think that there is no other solution to this most intractable of conflicts other than two states for the two peoples who are doomed to inhabit the land between the river and the sea. So the argument, the Israeli argument, is Palestinians have always missed opportunities. But the fact is that in 1948, Israel was left in control of 78% of mandatory Palestine, and the Palestinians were left in control, although not as an independent state, but under Jordanian and Egyptian rule, of just 22% of the land of mandatory Palestine. And they need to reach an agreement, and they need to understand, both sides need to understand, that Israel's unilateral annexation and arguably an apartheid system with different rights for Jews and non-Jews in Israel is going to be very, very problematic for the future of the Jewish state. And it's important to point out that the annexation question has created alarm amongst Jews who live abroad, both in the US and in this country too, because anyway, that's another issue, but it's an important element of the story.
It is another issue, and it would be wrong to leave it out. I think in less than 5 minutes you have answered that major question incredibly succinctly. In Hussam Zumlot's comments, he referred to Bantustans and enclaves, as I think Prime Minister Netanyahu had referred to an enclave. And he drew the obvious comparison in relation to apartheid, which must be very, very difficult for Israelis to hear, and something which inevitably, I'm sure, the proponents of the scheme would reject. But how damaging do you think that charge would be? And it has come from inside Israel as well as from the UN and others. And will it be sufficiently serious that those who have not been brokers up to now, like the EU, like the Quartet, like others, because it's been left to the United States, who arguably have moved from a position of being intermediate brokers to a party so much identified with Israel that they have lost that title? Is the challenge now, or would the challenge now be so significant that other parties, including Arab states and the EU, and those who I think Nikolai Mladenov would very much like to get more involved, to say we cannot leave this as it is, and it is time for us now to be engaged? What do you think?
Well, I think that if annexation doesn't go ahead, then the status quo of 53 years since 1967 is not a great position to be in either. The problem is that Israel has, particularly with the support of the Trump administration in recent years, has proved resilient to the habits, if you like, of international pressure. And the international pressure has not been significant. There's an argument that says that Israel has maintained the status quo in a cost-free way over the last half century or more. It may be that the debate over annexation and the interest that it's aroused and the alarm that it's aroused as well will serve to refocus international attention on this conflict. But look, you don't need me to tell you that there are many, many distractions: the COVID-19 crisis, the rise of China, the dysfunctional leadership from the United States. There are many, many issues that appear to be more urgent globally than this wearily familiar one. So I'm not holding my breath, but maybe if annexation goes ahead, or it's a minimal gesture because of the pressures that are becoming apparent, then it will galvanize the international community to take a closer interest and to respond more in a more effective way than it has done in the past. I'm no fan of Donald Trump, of course, but previous American presidents have also not managed to resolve this the Israel-Palestine conflict, including President Obama and his indefatigable Secretary of State John Kerry, who oversaw the last talks we have seen in the spring of 2014, so over 6 years ago, between Israelis and Palestinians. So maybe to end on a cautiously positive note, the debate over annexation will galvanize the United States, hopefully under President Joe Biden, to tackle this issue, not only for the sake of the Palestinians, but of course for Israel as well, in its own long-term interests.
Well, that is a good way to bring this to a conclusion, insofar as that we can. I hope we speak for a number of people around the world whose primary interest in this is to see it resolved. It is neither to be on one side nor the other, but it is to be on the side of a peaceful, just settlement of issues that, in classic terms, preserves and ensures the secure existence of the State of Israel, and also at the same time provides a just settlement for the Palestinians and a Palestinian state, as has long been the view of the international community. It's been a matter of great sadness to me over the years, 30 odd years of being involved as backbencher and minister, that we haven't reached that situation for reasons that are complex, but and remain complex and difficult to resolve. But ultimately it must be, because it is still, in the words of many in Israel itself, not least the intelligence and security, the failure to resolve this issue is as much a threat to Israel as anything that it faces from outside, as you referred to in your book, page 449, where you quoted a former leader of Shin Bet, the intelligence agency in Israel, as saying just that. And what we can do is hope that in the next few days, the sense of goodwill will prevail and people will realise that here is a watershed that need not be crossed, and that perhaps something else can emerge out of it. And indeed, if President Trump can do this, I would be, for one, very appreciative and very grateful. But I think it will need the rest of the world community, including the United Kingdom, to be engaged in relation to this. So, Ian, thank you for your time and commitment to this over many years, and for your time with CMEC this morning. And thank you to everyone who has followed all these various conversations and supports the work that CMEC does. So, Ian, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Alistair.